professor Beat Weber è svizzero, nato nel 1955, sposato, 3 figli e 3 nipoti. Ha fatto lo studio della teologia a Basel, sotto Seibold, con cui ha scritto anche la sua tesi. Seibold, il secondo relatore, era Jenny. La tesi è stata pubblicata sul Salmo 77, Psalm 77 und sein Umfeld, eine poetologische Studie, Bonner biblische Beiträge. Ha scritto soprattutto nel campo dei salmi. La sua opera principale è Werkbuch Psalmen, in 3 volumi. Ha portato anche delle illustrazioni qui. Interessante perché è un'opera, poi dirò anche di questo, ecco, allo stesso tempo scientifica ma anche pastorale. E il terzo volume dedicato alla teologia, i primi 2 sono esegesi dei salmi, il terzo volume è la teologia dei salmi, e ha ricevuto il premio Johann Tobias Beck. Dicevo che oltre ad essere uno studioso è un parroco, ecco. Parroco di una evangelica riformata comunità che si chiama Linden, nella Emmental. Questa è la sua principale occupazione. Era, perché adesso è ormai emerito anche in questo, ecco, fino al 2016. E è curioso come lui si intitola. Il titolo è Verbi Divini Minister, Verbi Divini, che è quasi un programma, ecco, per il suo lavoro sia nel campo biblico come anche nel campo pastorale. E perciò accanto a questo lavoro principale come parroco è docente part-time al Seminario teologico di Binnenberg, anche qui era, perché adesso e allo stesso tempo è Research Associate nel Dipartimento di Ancient Modern Languages and Cultures nell'Università di Pretoria, nel Sudafrica, e di cui anche la maggior parte dei suoi articoli, che sono nella rivista del Old Testament Essays, che è la rivista dell'Università di Pretoria. Dal 2017, vi dicevo, è sia in campo pastorale come anche in campo dell'insegnamento emerito, ed è attivo in diverse attività, sia, come vi dicevo, sia scientifiche, perché pubblica ancora articoli abbastanza frequentemente, ma sia anche nel campo pastorale, proprio alla missione di Basel. Ecco, anche queste Natale mandava alcune attività che sta facendo, proprio sta seguendo proprio in questo campo. A lui la parola.
My thanks to Professor Gianni Barbiero for his invitation and for his words of introduction. Similarly, I would like to record my thanks for the translation of my paper from German to English and then from English to Italian. Beatus vir is the opening of Psalm 1 and therefore of the Psalter in the Latin Vulgate. The Beatitude is in Hebrew Ashrei and in Greek Makarios. Praiseworthy is the one who devotes himself to memorizing the Torah of Adonai, meditating on it, and allowing it to determine his life. Happy, blessed, praiseworthy in Latin, Beatus. This is the name, in German Beat, given to me by my parents. Beatus, praiseworthy am I that I have been able to occupy myself with this wonderful book of Holy Scripture for many years, and praiseworthy are we when we are now allowed to do this together. This morning I will look with you at the Psalter as a whole and actually within the horizon of other writings that have become canonical. Canonical in quotation marks because it's a so debated term with so disputing meanings that you have to do it in quotation marks. It may be more correct to say of pre or proto-canonical processes, and so I say canonical horizon with this quotation mark. The named figures in the title, Moses and David, set out the boundaries of this canonical horizon, table 1. The name of Moses occurs seldom in the Psalter and almost exclusively in Book 4. By contrast, David's name is often found at least within the titles, or at least when the titles are included. In this paper, I'm employing both names as indicators of the associated writings, texts, themes, covenant makings, and functions, so you can criticize it's a little bit an umbrella term. The Psalter has also been described as temple in words, Bernd Janowski, similar, already Jerome. The metaphor of the sacred building refers to its special position. In this study, we shall confine ourselves especially to the entrance portal in the conviction that what we have there is a key to the understanding of the building as a whole. However, this word temple does not stand alone. Around it are grouped other word buildings which stand in relation to it. And around the whole of this sacred social complex is set a ring separating the outside from the inside. I am speaking of the canon of biblical writings as the interpretative horizon and the associated dialogue. Similarly, we shall also explore paths leading from the temple in words to other word buildings and assess their significance. Here in Rome, it is easy to grasp that the exploration of such a huge edifice, together with the surrounding buildings, requires a lot of time. My paper offers only a modest survey. For further detail, let me refer to the bibliography of the Psalms and Psalter, which is found on the Academia Edu website, my page there. The first entry is a bibliography. You can look at that. Furthermore, in my contribution on the Academia website, you will find more details on many of the things which I deal with here only briefly. Two more tips before we begin. First, the Psalms come to us in three main traditions with differences with regard to division, extent, and location: the Masoretic text, the Septuagint, and the manuscripts from the caves of the Dead Sea. Here we shall limit ourselves to the Hebrew Proto-Masoretic text form and not enter into discussions about the priority, dependence, or evolution of psalms or collections of psalms. Second, by contrast with most of the biblical writings, the book of Psalms consists of self-standing poetical units. At the same time, alongside the phenomena of separation, there are connecting moments which bind the individual psalms into a single composition written on a sefer, a scroll. Scholarly debate turns on the questions as to whether the separation or the connection has priority. Is the Psalter a compilation or is it a composition? That's the key questions. To put it very briefly, the duality of disjunctive and conjunctive phenomena establish and enables the use as individual psalms as well as a book. The faithful can and may read, pray, and use psalms in the liturgy as single units, However, since they are built on a methodological foundation, the Psalms are also to be read, memorized, and meditated as a continuous part of their context in the book and further in the context of Holy Scripture. The Psalter is no loose-leaf collection like a cookbook, but a unified whole. With Georg Steins, the Psalter is the privileged context for the individual psalm. The psalms are functive of the Psalter. Historical, the way is from the individual to the collection, but theologically, the Psalter is first and then the individual psalm. So you have to turn the way. As authoritative scripture, the psalm is simultaneously word to God, prayer, and word from God, scripture. Inasmuch as it is prayer and teaching about prayer, its theology is bound up with liturgy and spirituality. Oratio becomes meditatio and vice versa. It is to this Psalter that we now wish to turn under the following two subdivisions. First, the book's overture, its reverential character and the overall layout. Second, the Psalter in dialogue, Moses, David, and the Psalms. First, the book's overture, its reverential character and the overall layout. A, Psalms 1 to 3 as overture to the book and its connecting character. Books or scrolls form the compositional, literary, and theological units that make up the scriptural canon of the Bible. Their openings contain signals to guide the readers. These prepare them for the contents and structure the reading process in advance. The opening of the Psalter also contains hidden surpluses of meaning which channel the reader's reception and point them in the right direction to understand the book. Table 2. Contrary to the opinio communis that the book opens with Psalm 1 in combination with Psalm 2, I have proposed that the opening of the Psalter embraces Psalm 1, 2, and 3. The sequence of the first three psalms forms a foundation for and introduction to the understanding of the message of the book. Each of these three psalms introduce anew, in a categorical way, one of the specific themes, types, and communicative groups of the Psalter. To use an architectural image, a threefold progressive entrance porch leads us into the temple inwards. Once we have stepped through Psalm 3, we have arrived. Psalm 4 is a variation of 3 and adds nothing fundamentally new. The book's overture can be summarized under the keywords sapiential signpost, Psalm 1, you have the chart, kingship legitimized through Adonai in this word, Psalm 2, and praying and singing with David, Psalm 3. The latter proves to be the cantus firmus, which, following on from Psalm 3, continues smoothly. Psalm 3 has thus a double duty function. It acts as part of the overture to the Psalter as a whole, while at the same time serving as the opening of the David prayers. Occasionally, often at strategic points in the book, the continuity of prayer established with Psalm 3 is simultaneously silenced, modified, or reflectively deepened by means of inserted royal psalms, like Psalm 2, or wisdom psalms, like Psalm 1. The book's opening, Psalm 1 to 3, thus introduces the understanding of the Psalter. I speak of a cataphoric function. At the same time, by means of intertextuality, it links the Psalter to the authorized text and bodies of text. I speak of the anaphoric function. This combination of back and forward pointing functions is like the double-faced head of Janus. Both kinds of function are constitutive for the understanding of the Psalter. I would like to set this out while, for the most part, I concentrate on Psalm 1. I mentioned the function of introducing the Psalter only summarily. An introductory glance at Psalm 1 reveals the metaphor of the way which frames the psalm, the salvific image of the tree of life, and the judgment image of the chaff, the sapiential contrast of the righteous and the wicked, as well as the significance of the Torah. All these themes will be taken up in later psalms and modified and deepened. The position of the Torah at the center of the Beatitude in Psalm 1 thus points to its being the key concept for the understanding of the Psalter, as Scott Jones writes, "The placement of Psalm 1 at the introduction to the Psalter suggests that the meaning of Torah in Psalm 1 verse 2 is crucial, not only for how one understands this psalm, but also for how one understands the entire book of Psalms. Torah in the sense of instruction and teaching comes from Adonai, genitive subjectivus, and imparts God's teaching for life. The expression emerges abruptly at the beginning of the Psalter without explanation. It thereby impels the search after external explanation, activates the anaphoric system of reverence, and connects with other signals to references outside the Psalter. Table 3. Important references to the horizon are set out in the table. For the purposes of size, I allocate to it the names Moses and David, or the body of writing constituted by the Torah and the Nevi'im. The Psalter is not the Torah of Moses, but after it and with it and the Nevi'im, it is, to speak the Torah of David, and anyway, as God's will and way, the Torah of Adonai. In this way, it is raised to the level of the previously combined and authorized collection of Scripture, Moses and the prophets. I am now going to demonstrate this on the basis of an overview of some intertextualities. First, the Shema Yisrael in the context of the Great Commandment, Deuteronomy 6 and 11. You see the table 4, the texts. Already with Ibn Ezra, one finds the insight that in the background of Psalm 1 and with it that of the Psalter stands Deuteronomy 6 as a key text. The overture to the teaching of the Deuteronomic Moses, so the label of Karin Finsterbusch. The most significant contexts lie between Psalm 1, 1 and 2 and Deuteronomy 6, verse 7, table 4. The subject is the recitation and memorizing of the Torah with a view to its transmission to the following generations. The arrangement of the words is fourfold, with the expression of a merism of place, sitting, going, outside, inside, everywhere, and a merism of time, lying down, getting up, evening and morning, always. The merism of time from Deuteronomy 6, 7 is also found in Psalm 1, 2, but with a different terminology, by day and night, always. The merism of place is reflected in the formulation of Psalm 1:1. In the psalm, the positive statements, infinitives, are transformed into different behavior and contrasted with the behavior of the wicked. In this way, the verbs of movement are transformed into ethical statements about behavior to be avoided. Despite this transformation, the statements remain close to Deuteronomy 6. The threefold demarcation of Psalm 1:1 it's strange that it's a psalm following with saying at the beginning first, not. Happy are the man who is not. And then coming the positive. So it's starting with this 3 times a not. The threefold demarcation of Psalm 1:1 follows the threefold characterization of love for God in Deuteronomy 6:5 in a reciprocal way. The avoiding of the behavior of the ungodly becomes the necessary flip side of the change of direction towards Adonai. Again, this is expressed in the love of God's will, the Torah of Adonai. Furthermore, in the linking of Psalm 1 with 2, which speaks of the heavenly king and his anointed one on Zion, the Deuteronomic law of the king, Deuteronomy 17, moves into the picture. The king is to have a copy of the Torah and read aloud it in all the days of his life, similar to the merismus by day and night in Psalm 1, verse 2. Second, Joshua is the first prophet after Moses committed to the Torah. Table 5, the texts are there. The parallel between the divine speech in Joshua 1 and Psalm 1 is well known and clear. Table 5. The connections between Psalm 1, 2 and 3, and Joshua 1, verse 7 and 8 are significant. Only here is Haggah employed in the sense of a terminus technicus for Torah learning and connected with a successful life. Both statements are found in the first chapter of the respective books, similar position, and have an introductory function. By contrast with Psalm 1, the speaker and the one addressed in Joshua 1 are known. In connection with statements from Deuteronomy 31 to 34, Joshua is committed to the Torah commanded by Moses by Adonai himself. From the donor text, the parenetic words from Joshua 1:8 are taken up especially and recast in the form of a beatitude. Moreover, the addressee is generalized in a sapiential way, every man who. This statement can be referred to Zion's king in Psalm 2. The paradigmatic righteous one is the chosen, anointed one. Via Joshua 1, Psalm 1 points back to Deuteronomy, just as Joshua at the beginning of the Nevi'im is the first prophet committed by God to the Torah, so the hearer of the Psalter is praised by the wisdom teacher in his devotion to Adonai's Torah. With the Torah of Adonai, note the qualification, are the Torah connected with Moses, and the Nevi'im, starting with Joshua, and included David and his successors. Thus connected with Moses and David, the Psalter was added authoritatively of these bodies of text, which are already authoritative. In this way, a body of scripture comes into view, which later be referred to as the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms. Luke 24. Third point, Moses' final blessing to the people of Israel and their tribes, Deuteronomy 33. Chart, table 6. With Moses' blessing, we shall focus our observation on the statements at the beginning and the end of Deuteronomy 33. They are taken from the beginning or the end of the overture, Psalm 1, 2, and 3. The seemingly marginal overlaps are strengthened when Deuteronomy 33 and Psalm 1, 2, 3 are viewed as a whole. The striking address, Ashrei, praiseworthy, opens Psalm 1 and with it the Psalter. In a similar way, Moses closes his blessing on Israel in Deuteronomy 33:29. This is the only beatitude in the Pentateuch, and the very final word we get to hear from Moses. His oracle has a testamentary character and comes at a significant theme from the point of view of the theology of the canon. From such a background, the anonymous speaker of Psalm 1 takes the profile of Moses. Furthermore, the sequence of Moses' conclusion and Psalter beginning brings with it a docking of the Psalter to Deuteronomy, respectively the Moses Torah. In the horizon of the Psalter as a whole, as it is heard, it is Moses and not David who has the first word. It is God's teaching, Torah Adonai, subjectivus, but this is mediated. God is not the one speaking in Psalm 1. Beatitudes are sapiential formulae and never addressed by God to people. If the speaker in Psalm 1 is veiled in the authoritative robe of Moses, what are the possible identifications for the man, the righteous person addressed? In the two following psalms in the book's overture, the anointed one on Zion's throne, respectively David and God's people who are linked with him, move into the foreground, inasmuch the king and his people are dutifully bound to Adonai and his Torah. At the end of Psalm 2, the second beatitude broadens the link with Deuteronomy 33. As there, Psalm 2:12 is addressed to a group, reaching out beyond the psalm, all who take refuge in him are addressed. With him, the anointed one can be meant alongside Adonai. At the beginning of Wisdom Psalm 1 and at the end of Royal Psalm 2, there are therefore echoes of the blessing of Moses, at the end of which a beatitude is addressed to Israel. The inclusion of the Beatitudes around Psalm 1 and 2, and with that the interlocking of the two psalms, bring those who take refuge in Adonai into relationship with those who hear, meditate on, and take to heart the Torah of Adonai, included the kings on the throne of Zion. Table 7. In the first explicit David psalm, this is Psalm 3. At the end of Psalm 3, and so of the overture to the Psalter, there is another echo. This points to the beginning of the blessing of Moses. Compare Psalm 3, verse 9 to Deuteronomy 33, 1. What Moses expresses is God's salvific beracha over the people of Israel. By contrast with Deuteronomy 33 in Psalm 3, in the light of its title, it is now David who is speaking. After his own experience, he recognizes that salvation belongs to Adonai. Thus, at the beginning of his speech in the Psalter, David asked for a beracha for God's people, similar to Moses at the end of his life. Like beracha and ashrei, which frames the blessing of Moses, Deuteronomy 33, so there is a reverse sequence in the overture to the Psalter, Psalm 1:1, 3:9, the first and the last verses. The basic underlying root of David's prayer for blessing, Barach, Piel, bless, praise, appears here for the first time in the Psalter. Together with Ashrei, it forms a combination of Macarism and eulogy, one of the patterns stamped on the Psalter as a whole. It originates with Moses and is linked to David. With it, we have come from the overture to the Psalter and its overall structure, table 8. In the Psalter, Macarism and eulogies, Ashrei Baruch, are significant from the point of view of composition theology and the pragmatics of the text. Their double form of address combines horizontal instruction and vertical prayer and praise. This duality is found in structurally prominent places, namely at the end of the 5 books and of the Psalter. Moses' speech in the forms of Berachah and Ashrei are switched to David at the end of the overture, and it is in the Psalter turned to Ashrei and Baruch. The praise, blessing of Adonai, intoned with the participle Baruch, begins where it ends in the books of Samuel. If David honored God in a doxological way in his final song of thanksgiving, 2 Samuel 22, verse 47, in the Psalter, David begins to praise God with this very same song of thanksgiving in Psalm 18, verse 47. In the penultimate David psalm, in Psalm 144, he uses it for the last time. In the last David psalm, Psalm 145, Adonai is praised as king a further 4 times with the help of the finite verb barach, and then it's the end with barach, the Psalter. The Baruch formulas used in Psalm 18 and 145 are similar, and furthermore link the praise of God with genuine Mosaic rock sayings, zur. The overlapping of the address to people teaching mechanism and to God praise eulogies contributes to the description of the Psalter as word of God, prayer, and at the same time as word from God, teaching. I shall close this first main section with some words from Catherine Petrani in his dissertation, Pedagogy, Prayer and Praise. She writes, the dominant presence of shifting address in the Psalms from human audience to divine audience and the relative, though not complete, absence of this kind of shift in sapiential pedagogy makes this an appropriate framework for inquiring about the functional similarities and differences that mark sapiential and psalmic instruction. Thus, rather than standing distinct from the language of prayer and praise, wisdom in the Psalter provides an essentially psalmic mechanism for easing the hearer, you, into the role of the I and the we who turn to God in prayer and praise God within the congregation. In this way, all 3 levels of interpretation reveal that the primary instructional impact of the Psalter lies in its being verbalized, in these texts becoming the words that are spoken and songs that are sung. The lessons of these psalms cannot simply be read or heard or subsequently understood or applied. These are poems that invite their hearers to speak and sing, and thereby to understand, to know, and to relate God's work to others in the act of praise that conflates the horizontal and vertical aspect of psalmic speech. The teaching psalmist repeatedly draws the audience of the psalm out of the act of individualized listening and into vertically orientated speaking with communal dimension. So this gives also a hint that this old dichotomy between Gunkel and Mollwinkel about liturgy and literature should be abandoned. I think there is another way to combine these two, not to separate this old battle between Gunkelian and Mollwinkels has also to be with our history. Mollwinkel in Anglo-Saxon and Nordic states, and the German and continental with the idealistic Gunkelianism, that is also something. Okay, we go now to the second part, the Psalter in dialogue, Moses, David, and the Psalms. With the overture to the book, Psalm 1 to 3, intertextual and thematic links have already come into view. An overall view that takes up in the Psalter as a whole reveals that the most extensive and significant overlaps are concentrated in three areas of text and subject, table 9. Mainly on the basis of these overlaps, the conversation of the Psalter takes place in the canonical horizon. In this way, the Psalter is linked in different ways to the figures of Moses and David and to the ideas, traditions, and functions associated with them. We shall now compare the Psalter's David with the book of Samuel and Chronicles. Then we shall turn to the historical Psalm 78 in the middle of the Psalter and show how the Moses and David horizons overlap with each other. A, the horizon of the book of Samuel in the Davidic Psalter. David's final song of thanksgiving in 2 Samuel 22 with its 51 verses is almost identical to Psalm 18. It has the most extensive and closest agreement of the Psalter with any external text. Alongside this doublet, we have especially ascriptions to David and biographical information in the titles of the Psalter and the books of Samuel. This network creates a strong cohesion between the two biblical books. What meaning this interface generates with regard to the Psalter, we will now take a closer look at it. See table 10. This is a difficult one. At the beginning, verse 1, at the end, 50 and 51, the content of 2 Samuel 22 and Psalm 18 is bound up with David and events in his life. See table 10. He is the one speaking. Characteristic of the hymn of thanksgiving, Todah, his words are addressed in a twofold way. He praises God and, for the greater part of the psalm, he testifies before an implied audience about God's rescue of him out of his troubles. In the case of this kind of extensive agreement, it is worth looking at the small differences between the two versions. The most striking difference concerns the placing within the respective texts. The introduction to the song in 2 Samuel 22, verse 1, is closing David's narrative history in the books of Samuel. The place of Psalm 18 within the Psalter is less significant. Many more David psalms are following, and this circumstance fits less to the fact that also according to Psalm 18, verse 1, the words are set as a retrospective balance at the end of David's reign. This provides an indicator concerning the canonical sequence. 2 Samuel 22 has the priority, maybe not historical, but theological and canon hermeneutical, and corresponding Psalm 18 and with it the Psalter are to be interpreted from the books of Samuel. The other biographical information about David's life in the titles confirms this vector of significance. The narrative of David's history precedes David's prayers. We turn now to Psalm 3, which contains the first ascription to David and likewise the first mention of a biographical situation. The notice, when he fled before Absalom his son, in Psalm 3:1, links the psalm to the event narrated in 2 Samuel 15 to 18. With this reference in the title, this event is alluded to and, presupposing knowledge of it, evoked as the horizon of interpretation of the psalm. In this way, Psalm 3 offers, compared to the political, tactical maneuvering of David in the Absalom story, a deepening in the sense of a prayer theology. It invites the receiving community of faith to a conclusion. Events are to be perceived in the light of the hidden working of God, With David, need is to be brought before God trustfully in song and prayer. At the end of Psalm 3, this attitude is passed on to the following David psalm with David's prayer request for blessing for the way of life of the people of God. Beyond the deepening of the theology of prayer, the new reading of the David story initiated by Psalm 3 is reinforced with a foundation of confidence to God. This arises due to the aforementioned song of thanksgiving in 2 Samuel 22. Like the Absalom story, this precedes the Psalter and should also be understood as prior. Thus, the community that later prays and meditates on the Psalter knows that God rescues David out of all his troubles. In the face of this knowledge of a happy ending, the prayers of David in the Psalter are founded on trust in God. The community that receives the Psalter will thus be stirred up to its own path of trust in Adonai, following his anointed one. A series of signals supports the virtual priority of 2 Samuel 22 to the Psalter, namely the fact that David's song of thanksgiving was memorized present before his appearance in the Psalter as Psalm 18. This shall now be shown, table 11. Some additional clues in more detail in my publications. Zion's messianic king in Psalm 2 appointed to Adonai over all the nations, and the information about David and his song in the title of Psalm 3 point back to the royal Davidic song of thanksgiving at the end of the books of Samuel. In addition, the terminology of enemies and salvation from Psalm 3 as well as Psalm 2 and 3 are the compelling motivation for refuge in Adonai. The beatitude in Psalm 2:12 to take refuge, chazah, in Adonai, is taken up by David through the word about the shield, magen, in Psalm 3:4. This linking of terms has its basis in 2 Samuel 22 and also has a Mosaic foundation, Deuteronomy 32-33. Before David's song of thanksgiving appeared in the Psalter in the form of Psalm 18 and also afterwards, it is clear from many points of view that the Psalter should be interpreted against the background of the thanksgiving song of 2 Samuel 22. The outcome is indisputably certain. The God of Israel, who once saved his anointed one, will forever save his people anew. In the Psalter, David's final thanksgiving from 2 Samuel 22 has an extensive hermeneutical significance. Moreover, it has similarities with the final song of Moses, Deuteronomy 32. Brings it into the Psalter and broadens the link with Moses and David horizons, table 10. The label Eved, servant, in Psalm 18:1 appears for the first time in the Psalter. In connection with the formula belonging to the servant of Adonai, not attested in 2 Samuel 22, it reinforces the similarity between the two songs and figures. Immediately at the beginning of Psalm 18, this title of honor connected with Moses is also awarded to David. The assignment of the psalm to David appears significantly only afterwards. Interesting. Furthermore, it is worth mentioning verse 17, where there is an etymological allusion to the name of Moses with the verb mashapul out. The verb is found rarely only here in Hiphil and Exodus 2, kal. Like Moses, David is also pulled out of waters. And like Moses after the rescue of the Red Sea, Exodus 15, he also intones a song of thanksgiving. Yet the song of David surpasses the Moses event in that first it is God himself and not the daughter of Pharaoh. who pulls him out, and second, out of chaotic, hostile, mighty waters, and not just out of the shallow waters of the Nile. B. Chronicles in relation to the Psalter. The figure of David connects the Psalter not only with the books of Samuel, but also with Chronicles. In this connection, the Psalter shows itself to be divided in two parts. Books 1 to 2, maybe also 3, are orientated towards the political David of Samuel, the anointed one, before and after his accession to the throne. By contrast, Book 4 and 5 have affinities with the chronistic, religious David who acts under the theocratic rule of Adonai. As far as the Psalter and Chronicles are concerned, the most significant interface occurs between Psalm 96, 105, 106, and 1 Chronicles 16, table 12. This is the most extensive and in this way the only poetic passage in Chronicles. The Psalms are thus the donor text. Chronicles refers back to the Psalms out of Book 4, which are attributed to neither David nor Asaph, and associates them with a King David who acts liturgically and his Levitical chorister Asaph. The translation of the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem forms the motivation. The Levitical bearers are chosen by David, and this goes back to the word of Adonai, mediated by Moses. During this procession of the ark, David causes Adonai to be thanked and praised by Asaph and his brothers. Moreover, they recite the song in which the three above-mentioned psalms are selectively taken up, adapted, and formed into a new psalm, a collage. Its hymnic character, with the emphasis on the royal reign of God, see Psalm 96, matches the occasion. By contrast with the Psalter, the Levitical singers express in Chronicle no laments or intercessions, but only thank, yada, and praise, halal. Corresponding to that is the fact that from the penitential Psalm 106, only the frame of praise is taken up. If 2 Samuel 22 brings in a final perspective to the beginning of the Psalter, the Psalms in 1 Chronicles 16 serve to celebrate an initial event. The first recitation of a song of praise is followed by the establishment of the service of Asaph and his brothers before the ark, Tamid, perpetually. Later words from another similarly initial event are taken from the David Psalm 132. This happens on occasion of the dedication of the temple and occurs in fact at the end of the prayer of Solomon, developing the Vorlage from 1 Kings 8. In 2 Chronicles 6, 41 and 2, Solomon closes his prayer with words from Psalm 132. Here too, the reception of the psalm is brought into connection with the ark, which now finds its final resting place in the temple. In Chronicles, David acts as teacher of the Torah and founder of the liturgy under the sovereignty of Adonai as meditated by Moses. A collective, universal, and messianic eschatological horizon comes into the foreground. Book 4 of the Psalter, from which the Chronicle takes up 3 psalms, is the one most strongly stamped with the figure of Moses. See Table 1. It opens programmatically with a Moses psalm and closes with 2 psalms which take up the early Mosaic history, 105, 106. Moses is the mediator and intercessor for his people before God, who bestows a new beginning after the breach of the covenant and the collapse of David's kingdom. As formerly on Sinai, so in the exile on the ground that his mercy outweighs his wrath. Exodus 34, verses 6 and 7. Our little panopticon of the Psalter within the horizon of the hermeneutics of the canon leads us now into the center of the Psalter, where once again we come across Moses and David. So my last point. See Moses and David in the center, quotation mark, of the Psalter. Book 3, 73 to 89, the center of the 5 books, is characterized by Psalms of Asaph. To these belongs Psalm 78, to which we now term Table 13. Psalm 77:21 sees the first explicit mention of Moses in the Psalter. The psalm ends with God's leadership through Moses and Aaron in connection with the attested passage through the sea. It is interestingly that not the people goes through the sea, but God goes through the sea. Psalm 78 sees the immediate follow-on of the second longest psalm. It is the programmatic center of the Asaph group. At the same time, it marks the numerical, see the sign in the Masorah, ontological center of the Psalter as a whole. The Moses at the end of Psalm 77 is taken up in Psalm 78. The opening of that psalm has similarities with the opening of the Song of Moses in Deuteronomy 32. The terms Torah appears 3 times, and the presentation of the early story of Israel places this psalm more than any other psalm in a Mosaic horizon. In order to remember or call to remember Zachar, Kal, and Hiphil, God and his saving acts respectively, it is central not to forget him or them. Moreover, salvific and guilty events from Moses' time are presented in 2 narrative arches. Moses is present, although his name does not emerge. By contrast, that of David appears, but only at the end, and thus emphasized. The theology of history set out in Psalm 78 begins with Moses and the rescue in the Red Sea, and ends with the election of Judah, Zion, and David as royal shepherd. A comparison of the end of Psalm 77, 20 and 21, with the end of Psalm 78 reveals the intention to link the 2 great figures. David receives the authoritative mantle transferred from Moses and walks in his footsteps. Opening prophetically with a word from God, Psalm 78 is, as history Torah, simultaneously parable and puzzle. Like Psalm 1, it too is a didactic text. All psalms combine Torah and wisdom and are anchored in Moses. What is new by contrast with Psalm 1 is the fact that Torah wisdom is for the first time in the Psalm referred to Israel as a national community. It's not personalized, it's nationalized. In Psalm 78, the opposition of righteous and wicked from Psalm 1 is sharpened into the contrast between the erring generations, forgetful of the salvific events and the instruction, and those who hold present God's wonders and keep his commandments. As instruction of the people, Psalm 78 presents a Torah that is interpreted and actualized and itself become Torah. Thus, Psalm 78 stands on the lines heralded by Psalm 1 in connection with the Torah, Pentateuch, and Nevi'im. The Psalter itself becomes Torah of Adonai and part of the authoritative writings, as is said later by the Midrash to Psalm 78. Let no one says to you, Psalms are not Torah. They are Torah. And the prophets are too Torah. Therefore it says, now the first verse in Psalm 78, listen, O my people, to my Torah. And my Torah, can only God says my Torah. So it's a prophetic a small prophetic intrusion at the beginning of Psalm 78. No wisdom teacher can say my Torah. Only God can say my Torah. So, if the Mosaic beginning of Psalm 78 points to Psalm 1, its Davidic conclusion looks to Psalm 2. Psalm 2, like Psalm 78 and others, contains parallels to Nathan's oracle in 2 Samuel 7. At least as strongly as with its references back to the beginning of the Psalter 78 is the starting point for the psalms which follow. Of note are the other historical psalms, 105, 106, 135, 146, and the final Davidic Psalm 145. Closer is the path from 78 to the end of Book 3 and the beginning of Book 4. Convert Table 13. The underlying historical sequence from Moses to David in Psalm 77 and 78 is inverted in Psalm 89 and 90 for theological reason. The end of the Davidic kingdom leads to a thinking back to figures connected with Moses before David appears in the new guise. This is part of the testimony set out in the center of Psalm 78, that despite his people's history of sinning, Adonai was, is, and will be merciful. The self-revelation and word of grace from Exodus 34, verse 6 and 7, has its significant traces within the Psalter, especially in the psalm which come after Psalm 78. Thus, with Psalm 78 in the center of the Psalter, something essential for the overall interpretation springs into view. The Psalter is a book of instruction for Israel that, applied in all kinds of different ways, will lead the community of faith through the ages. That conclusion, that David as a historical and prototypical figure stamps the Psalter is evident. The role of Moses does not measure up to that of David, but one should not underestimate its significance. With its tradition and functions, it is present at the beginning of the book in Psalm 1, in its 5-part structure. Furthermore, at important hinges on the Psalter, such as the beginning, the center, and the transition from book 3 to 4. Moses' emphasis are combined with the Davidic ones. At its center, 77, 78, the Psalter has a place where there's a special overlap of Mosaic and Davidic aspects. The Psalter is a book on its own with the biblical writings. At the same time, scarcely another book possesses a greater character as a signpost to others. If we do not realize this character, we cannot understand the Psalter sufficiently in the horizon of the other canonical writings. Its crystallization on Moses and David is an essential part of its message. The Psalter is the Torah of Adonai, which is to be ever newly memorized, prayed, and meditated on, spoken, and lived. It leads to God, praises Him, keeps His people with Him and the Messiah, and lets them attain to life. Thank you for your attention.